Hello, it's Captain Jim here for the Monopoly Project review. We're doing another one of our floating book reviews on our Monopoly Project yacht. Every successful real estate investor has a yacht, and unfortunately it's the Bikini Girls' day off, so you just have me. We're here on Bella Vista Lakes. It's 7 p.m. on the 2nd. It's still around 100 degrees, and we're here to review three books. Or should I say three sets of books. The first one is the should have arranged this better, huh? The first set is the chemistry of powder and explosives. Okay, and its companion book, Boom, on the same subject on explosives, chemistry and history of explosives. The second one is two books that I started reading actually last spring, and they've been sitting on the shelf because I got sort of burned out on politics. They're both about politics, specifically the election last year. The first one is Influence on the Psychology of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini, who's a very famous author at ASU here on the subject of persuasion and what makes things persuasive. Scott Adams, who's the inventor of Dilbert, wrote a book called Win Bigly, in which he discusses how Donald Trump was very successful in using persuasion techniques in the 2016 election. And then finally, the last one, this was a book by Rodney Stark titled The Rise of Christianity. And it was recommended to me by Pastor Jeff, who's also our real estate agent and partner in the Monopoly Project too. So it's part of his studies. He actually finishes his degree, his pastor degree, whatever it is, in June. And so he's been working at it for 4 years. And so this is one of the books that he did. So I would like to discuss, let's start with this one because it was real interesting. It's about how did an obscure Jewish sect that started in Jerusalem sometime in the 30s, the 30 AD, with the death, the crucifixion of their teacher, rise to 3 centuries later. But they became the state religion of the most powerful empire in the Western world. And so how did that happen? And it's interesting. Stark is a sociologist, and he is venturing into history, and he talks about that in the first few chapters of the book. And he says that he's using, he doesn't really have a background in history, he doesn't really have familiarity, and so he had a lot of help from historians. And so but he is using sociological principles to analyze that. And whether you're a believer or not, and obviously I'm a believer, I'm a Christian, but whether you're a believer or not, it's an undeniable fact that, Christianity, what we now call Christianity, started in Jerusalem with the crucifixion of Jesus. Those are historical facts. And then by the time we got to 300, 350, it had become through Constantine, who founded Constantinople, it became the state religion, the de facto state religion of the Roman Empire, and then it went on to be the de facto religion of the Western world until the rise of Islam in the 632 or whenever it started, and then I've been competing ever since. Those are simple historical facts. So what made this sect, cult, whatever you want to call it, this small group of people able to rise and basically show the explosive growth? And he's talking about, he calculates the numbers, and I have some questions about the numbers, but I basically believe what he says, that it grew at like 40% per decade for those 3 centuries, and that's how you got so that it became the dominant religion in the world. He compares it to the Mormon religion, which according to him, is about 150 years old. He says they're on the same path. And he's not saying that they're eventually going to take over the world. He's just saying that that's one of the sociological things that he studies, is how do people form networks, and how do they grow an organization, whether it's a religion or a business or whatever. So I'm a student of ancient history, and especially of ancient Rome, and so I found this very interesting. It's a very interesting book from a sociological point of view: history, religion, Christianity. The two things I wanted to highlight about it is, one thing that I did not know, and he claims it in this book, is that the male to female ratio in the ancient world was 1.3. There were 1.3 men, boys, males for every female, and this was due to two things. One was because of the widespread practice among all cultures of female infanticide. When you had a baby girl, they wanted boys, and they would expose them and kill them. And the other one, of course, is the high death rate in pregnancy and birth of those who actually survived. And to me, that's an amazing fact, because right now we're used to a world in which the male to female ratio is pretty much 1-to-1. Certainly in the Western world, we've heard a lot about that in China when they had the one child policy, and again they went through this female infanticide, this time through abortion. When families had their one child, if it was a girl they would abort, and if it was a boy they would not. And it leads to very unstable societies, because when you have that many men around who don't have women, there's not much else to do but drink and go out and fight and have wars. And so I was amazed by that statistic. I didn't know it, I'd never thought about it, but it might explain a lot of why there was such slow cultural, economic, scientific progress in the ancient world, all the way up until the Enlightenment, and then finally the age of industrialization in 1800. So that was the interesting thing. So the other part, of course, is what I said, is when he claims that in 60, Jesus was crucified in 30 or 33. By the time you got to AD 60, 30 years later, he claims there were only 2,000 or 3,000 Christians in all of the world, not just Jerusalem, but in Rome and everywhere. And I don't doubt his numbers, but I go back to the scriptures, and of course at Pentecost it said that 3,000 converted, and that was around earlier than that. So it would seem that's sort of a somewhat disagreement, because there were other conversions, and then Paul went out on his missions and all over the Roman Empire. So it would be interesting to ask him that question of, Pentecost converted 3,000. There were other examples given in the scriptures of mass conversion, and of course Paul went and set up all these churches, which were undoubtedly small. I mean, they might have been 100 or 200 people. There were house churches, but it'd be interesting to ask him that question. But in any case, if you're interested in history, if you're interested in sociology, if you're interested in the ancient world and ancient Rome, if you're interested in Christianity, any of these things, this is a great book. It's fairly short, and it's 200 pages. It's got a lot of notes and references. So I definitely recommend The Rise of Christianity by Rodney Stark, as he puts it, how the obscure, marginal Jesus movement became the dominant religious force in the Western world in a few centuries. And he's exactly right about that. That's a historical fact. So thank you, Pastor Jeff, for recommending this book. I really enjoyed it. Okay, we're going to go on, but first I'm going to make sure my camera's recording. I actually, a couple days ago, I put my phone on the hood of my car because we were bringing my mother-in-law back to her place, and of course I forgot about it, and I went to make salmon, and I went to set the timer, and I said, uh-oh, my phone is on the hood. So I called my wife, who was driving, and she said, I'm looking for it. She said, I heard it crash and something fell off. And I said, where? She said, over on Greenfield. So I drove over there. We said a prayer several times, and then we started walking the street, and 30 seconds after the prayer, she looked out in the middle of the road. We were looking along the sidewalk because it was obviously on the passenger side, but in the middle of the road there it was, and it was cracked, but it's working, and you can see me recording now. I got a cracked screen, but I got a functional phone, so thanks be to God for that. In any case, let me check this, and then I will go on to the next two. And you can see the sunset, the Bella Vista Lake sunset in the background. Okay, we're back, and apparently it's recording, and I can click on my face, and hopefully you can see my face, although you may not want to see that, because we're backlit here, and so if I had a videographer, this would probably be a little better. But let's go on to two books: the Chemistry of Powder and Explosives, which was recommended in a article out of Shooting Times on propellants. And it was written in 1943 as a introductory text for people who are familiar in chemistry with gunpowder and explosives. And so it's somewhat outdated because it ends in 1943. In looking at, I bought it at Amazon, and in looking it up, you know, all these limitations were pointed out by several of the reviewers, and they said another book that does the same thing and might even be better is Boom, which deals with the same subject, but it's much more modern. And the guy who wrote it is he's an author with a very good writing style, and he also wrote books on cooking and the chemistry of cooking. So it's an interesting book. As far as the Chemistry of Powder and Explosives, and let me get you the author, Tenny Davis. Like I said, he says that, you know, this is a handbook. There's nothing new in it. There's some interesting history of the people who invented these things. There's lots of equations, or not equations, but chemical, you know, if you know anything about chemistry, I took one course in chemistry in college, of course. You can see right here, being a physics major, I took one course in chemistry, but there's a lot of that. There are some pictures of the people who invented these things. A lot of interesting historical pictures of people actually making explosives and doing stuff, and so it's interesting. Here's some more equations and such. It's interesting. Would I recommend it? No, it's not worth. It's worth it. To me, it was worth it as a historical artifact to just read it and take a look at it. I certainly wouldn't recommend it if you're interested in the subject at all. The chemistry of gunpowder and explosives, which I am. When we were kids, we made gunpowder in my friend Peter's oven when his mother wasn't there. We bought charcoal and sulfur and nitrate and ground it together, and then you're supposed to heat it, put water in it and heat it, and it actually sort of worked. It was pretty low quality gunpowder, and actually Tinney's book explains why. But if you're interested in that stuff, this is a much better book. Like I said, it's much more modern. You can see that's where I am. I'm only halfway through. I haven't finished it, but of all this, it's very interesting. He's got some equations and chemical symbols. You can't get away because explosives are basically organic chemistry with some nitrates thrown in, and so. But it's a better quality book. He has a lot more interesting stories. He's a much more entertaining writer, and again, I'll give Tinney a break there because he's not claiming to be an entertaining writer. He's writing this as a textbook, a primer on explosives and gunpowder, whereas this guy is doing it as a popularization. If you're interested in explosives, he even goes into nuclear explosives. He breaks explosives up into three categories: mechanical, chemical, and nuclear. And a mechanical one is like a boiler exploding, and of course the chemical ones are the ones we're more familiar with, and finally the nuclear is much more powerful, and he goes into the shock wave speed and all those kind of things. So like I said, if you're interested in chemistry and explosives, this is the book to buy. Very entertaining. So, and then finally, let's get to these books, which I've had on my shelf for since last year, since before the national election. Now you can see the sun's right in my eye, so you can see me really well. Like I said, I had these books on my shelf. I've been reading them, especially last spring and summer, and then in the fall I sort of got burned out on the election. I know a lot of people did, and I put them aside. I finished them a little later. This book here, if you want to do any persuasion, if you want to persuade people, and basically that's all we humans do is persuade people, either on a personal level, or we're running a marketing or a sales team, or we're doing something where we're trying to convince somebody else to do something, you need to have this book. And again, Robert Cialdini's at ASU. He's a PhD. He's a professor there. He didn't invent these 6 items, but he documents them very well in this book. If you want to persuade people and you want to be in sales and marketing, you have to do these things. And just the 6 what he calls the weapons of influence are reciprocation. If I give you something, you feel obligated to give me something. Commitment and consistency. Once somebody starts down a path, it's very hard for them not to keep going that path, because people have a commitment to consistency, even though it's illogical. So if you can get somebody to give you a little gift, it'll be much easier to persuade them to give you a bigger gift later. Social proof, everybody else is doing it. Liking people, obviously, and this is pretty obvious, although people won't want to admit it, is that if people like you, they will do things for you. So you got to be likable. And of course, appeal to authority always works. If somebody's wearing a doctor's coat and says something about medicine, you believe them. If somebody's in a 3-piece business suit and they talk about economics, you believe them. If somebody's, the opposite of that, they're just, in old clothes and talk about those things, you don't believe them. And you can tell the person that, this person in old clothes is a noted scientist, and they still won't believe it. This stuff works even if you know it's being done to you. And then the final one is scarcity. If something is scarce, then everybody wants it. And you see that now, and this technique of scarcity is used on Amazon and any of the internet sales stores or anywhere. When they always say there's 2 left. Whatever the product is, there's only 2 left, or 1 left, or 3 left. And if you go to a dealership, and try and buy a car, at least in the old days, you'd actually buy a car at a dealer. They say, "Oh, this is the last one on the lot. If you don't take it, it'll be gone tomorrow." And the great thing about these 6 methods of persuasion is they all work, even if you know them and you know it's being done to you. It's uncanny, but that's the kind of animals we are. That's the kind of animals people are, is that they respond to these things, and it certainly, like I said, it works. And so basically, Scott Adams, who was the inventor, drawer, writer of Dilbert, which we all love because it so accurately captured business life in a modern corporation, went on this book, and he's talking about persuasion in a world where facts don't matter. And basically, he's taken off from Cialdini. He mentions Cialdini as the I forget what term he is, but Cialdini is the big dinosaur or whatever. But anyway, so again, this is a really good book because he gives examples. I didn't have time to take out some examples, especially since most of it I read last year. But certainly, if you want to follow up on Cialdini's book, this is certainly number 1. The other book that I'm going right into the sun, so I'm looking right at the sun. The other book that he wrote is How to Fail at Almost Everything and Succeed, and he tells a biographical story of his life, and how he was very effective in these things. And he did, again, his claim to fame, or his rise in his prognostication abilities, was that he predicted that Trump would win back in 2016, just based on the elements of persuasion that he knew and that he saw that Trump was extremely effective at. So again, I highly recommend Wayne Bigley. I highly recommend Cialdini's book. I think he actually has an update to the edition I just showed you. He also has another book that's on the same subject but a little different. But if you know those 6 principles, basically you get the idea. And I should probably incorporate more of them in my Monopoly work. And so I'll take a look at that. In any case, like I said, so this is Jim on the Monopoly Project Yacht. I'm going to sign off, and I got some more books, some more interesting books on the shelf. including a couple more on religion, and I will actually finally get back to the ones on economics and real estate and all that, which is supposed to be the subject of the Monopoly blog. And also I will have a discussion of, I talked to a guy who is into Airbnb, and he just started in like the last 3 or 4 years and has been very successful. So I'm looking at Airbnb as an option. In any case, thanks everybody, and we will see you next time.